WCNC TV Charlotte. This is FlashPoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Hello, everybody. You heard it. This is FlashPoint, and we actually have a very special episode of FlashPoint today. This is our last FlashPoint of 2015, so we invited Congressman Richard Hudson to join us to tell us about how the year has gone, how he feels things have been in Washington. Congressman Hudson represents the 8th District here in North Carolina, which covers most of our viewing area, all the way from Mecklenburg County over to Robeson County. So you have quite the district, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, great to be here with you.
We certainly appreciate it. And let's just start off with that. How do you feel about 2015? You've spent a lot of time in Washington. You've spent a lot of time here in this area. How do you feel things have gone?
Well, it's been a productive year, but I think most people who are watching at home, most folks out there, whether you're Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, feel like Washington's a little bit out of control, that the government doesn't understand what they're going through. And that's the reason I ran for Congress in the first place, is I want to be a voice for common sense. I want to bring voice to people who felt like there wasn't a voice. And so I've worked really hard this year to try to champion issues that are important to people back home. And we've had some success, but it's divided government, and so you don't get everything you want. And so we continue to work.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest issues that people feel when they look at what's going on in Washington. They feel like people are voting the party line rather than voting for the people who elected them into office. But I noticed I was looking at some research that you kind of fall a little more toward the center sometimes when it comes to some of your voting. How do you feel about people's perspectives of the job you've done so far?
Well, my approach has been to always stand on principle, to always do what you think is right, to get things done. And so a lot of the issues I've worked on over the years, whether it was in transportation security or whether it's now in energy policy, I've tried to reach out to Democrats who I've worked hard to build relationships with and tell them, look, this is what I want to do. I want you to work with me. And, at first I think the reaction was, maybe I'll play along with the new guy until we see what he's up to. But you build trust with people when you start incorporating their ideas and you start really working with them.
Now, you brought it up. Let's actually talk about some of the transportation security. You were partly responsible for the Hernandez Airport Security Act, and you actually went to LAX. This was the security guard who was gunned down back in 2013. This was a big issue for you, and you were in the national spotlight for the work that you did with this. Talk about why this is important and what this has done for our local community as well as nationally.
Sure. Well, my first term, I was chairman of the Transportation Security Committee on Homeland Security, and so when the LAX shooting happened, it was under my jurisdiction, and so we took a look at not only what happened at the shooting, but what was the response, what were some of the lessons we can learn, and we heard a lot of information about miscommunication between first responders. The law enforcement folks who were there, who responded to that incident, acted heroically. They did exactly the right thing. They charged in and stopped the shooter. But there was a lot of problems with people making 911 phone calls were routed to the county 911 instead of the local 911 for the airport. There were panic buttons that didn't work. There were phones within the airport that weren't working. And so there were a lot of issues that we looked at in a bipartisan way. We went out to L.A. and had a hearing with the local congresswoman who's a Democrat and other leaders, and we found that there are some problems with the way that the different first responders communicate with each other in these types of emergencies. And so we put legislation together to set a standard for all airports around the country. So if we have another incident, the response will be much better coordinated.
When it comes to safety, people are nervous right now because of what's been going on, what just happened in San Bernardino. How do you feel as a legislator you can make a difference in people's lives, how you can help make them feel safer? I know that you had a lot to do with the SAFE Act.
Sure. Well, when I first heard that we were going to bring 10,000 Syrians into the country, a red flag sort of went off for me in wondering, can we handle this many folks? Can we actually process background checks on that many people that quickly? And so I started asking questions, and I didn't like the answers I was getting. And so, and actually, because I'm not on Homeland Security anymore, I tried to get people on the committee to actually take this issue and run with it, and couldn't get anybody that felt like they had time to work on it. So I told my staff, we're going to do it. We're going to write this legislation. And so a month before the Paris shooting, we started working on this issue. And around that time is when the FBI director testified to Congress. This is Obama's appointee, and he said, we can't screen these Syrians because when you put a background check together, you have to go talk to people and you have to go follow up, and you can't do that in a war zone. And so when he said that, that was really the point at which I said, we've got to do something. And so we wrote the legislation, worked with the Homeland Security Committee, started reaching out to Democrats, and was just begging to get attention. And it unfortunately took the Paris incident to really focus everybody on that problem.
Well, and Governor McCrory ended up coming out supporting your position, feeling the same way for North Carolinians. How do you feel that conversation has changed the way that conversations happen now with Americans about people of the Muslim faith? Do you think it's created a conversation that isn't quite geared the way that it should be?
Well, it's an important conversation for us to have, but the approach I took, it was, look, we're not going to say ban all refugees. We're not going to say ban Syrians. We're not going to, ban any class of people. Process and make sure that we know who these individuals are, because we've got ISIS who came out and said they're going to exploit the crisis and sneak people into our country. We had the Director of National Intelligence recently who reported to Congress that, in fact, we've stopped terrorists who've tried to exploit the refugee program into our country, and so we know they're doing it. And so we need to have a serious conversation about it, but that conversation doesn't need to be about race or religion or class. It just needs to be about folks coming from very dangerous parts of the world where we know terrorists want to exploit these type of programs, and making sure we've got the protections in place for the American people.
So in your mind, it's really just a conversation about safety.
Absolutely.
Your top 3 priorities here in the 8th District: jobs, jobs, and jobs. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about getting the 8th District back to work.
Well, it is my top priority. I came up with that line at an appearance early on when I first became a candidate, and the question was, what are your top 3 priorities? And I started thinking about it. I said, well, there is nothing more important than jobs. And, the economy has improved a lot nationally, but here in the 8th District, this part of North Carolina, folks are still struggling. And as prices go up, wages go down, people are still struggling, whether you worked in the furniture industry or the textile industry. People are still trying to find jobs to replace that income and take care of their families. And so there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And so, there's a lot of areas that you need to look at. The federal government doesn't create jobs, but we can prevent job creation through uncertainty, through bad policies. And so my focus has been to look at those areas where, I come home every weekend and I visit businesses all throughout our district, and I talk to job creators and I ask them, are you hiring people? If not, what are the barriers? What are the challenges you're facing? And I hear over and over, it's regulations from the federal government, it's the cost of health care, it's the cost of energy, it's uncertainty about the future. And so I can remember a developer I talked to, a very large developer, said that he's sitting on more cash than he's ever sat on in his entire life. Doesn't know what his health care costs are going to be next year, and he's hired lawyers, plural, and CPAs, plural, and even they can't tell him what his costs are going to be, so he's having to sit on that money. He's doing the responsible thing by sitting on that capital. But I'd rather him go out and do projects with that and hire people and get economic activity.
So what's the answer? What do you do in Congress to help these businessmen? It's
all the above. I mean, you look at rules that the federal government is printing just thousands and thousands of pages of regulations. I talked to a banker here in Charlotte who only has 2 branches in his bank. He said he had to hire 4 people just to read the regulations that have come out. There were 4 regulations came out last year, all of them over 500 pages each. And so he had to hire 5 people just to read the regulations so they can follow the rules. But that, that's a whole lot of money and activity wasted just to comply with the federal government. And are people safer? Is your money safer in the bank because of it? I don't think so, and I'm not sure you can measure it. So regulations is a big thing. We are the highest corporate tax rate country in the world, and so taxes, especially when it comes to manufacturing, make us uncompetitive, and so tax policy is a big piece of it. Another piece of it is education. Are we training our workers for the jobs that are out there? And my experience traveling the district, going to businesses, is that we've got employers trying to hire people and can't find people with the skills they're looking for. And so while we've got people looking for work, we've got employers looking for people with certain skills. And so what I've tried to do also is match up our education system so that we're training our people for those, not just the jobs today, but the 21st century jobs of tomorrow.
I want to continue with jobs and energy, jobs and climate change, and the recent summit that happened in Paris. We're going to get to all of that coming up right after the break. You're watching FlashPoint, and we will be right back. Everybody, stick with us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm meteorologist John Wendell.